In the abandoned Windmere Mill of Washington State, one man refuses to leave. Edgar Windmere, the last inhabitant of what was once the region's most prosperous lumber operation, guards a single door on the third floor with an obsession that borders on madness. For 37 years, he has lived alone among the silent machinery, ensuring that door remains locked. When asked why, his weathered hands tremble, and he whispers only this: some doors should never be opened. But before we uncover the horrifying truth Edgar has been hiding all these decades, if you're drawn to the darkest mysteries that history tried to bury, make sure to subscribe to Dark Heritage Files and hit that notification bell. We bring you the stories that others are afraid to tell. And while you're here, let us know in the comments what city and country you're listening from. We love connecting with our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now let's step into the shadows of Windmere Mill. The story we're about to tell comes from fragments of old records and whispered memories that have survived in the remote valleys of Washington State. According to local accounts passed down through generations, the truth about Edgar Windmere and his mysterious vigil began in the autumn of 1893, when the Windmere Mill was still the beating heart of a thriving community. The Windmere Mill stood like a wooden cathedral in the dense forests of northwestern Washington, its towering frame and massive water wheel dominating the landscape where the Cascade River carved its way through ancient pines. Built in 1878 by industrialist Marcus Windmere, Edgar's uncle, the mill had grown from a modest family operation into one of the largest lumber operations in the territory. The community that sprouted around the mill reflected the diverse workforce that Marcus Windmere had carefully assembled. Norwegian immigrants brought their expertise with cold-weather logging, while Swedish families contributed generations of woodworking knowledge. Finnish workers arrived with their understanding of river transport, and German craftsmen added precision to the mill's operations. The company houses, built in neat rows along Mill Road, echoed with a dozen languages each evening as families gathered after long days of dangerous work. Edgar Windmere had arrived at the mill in 1891, a young man of 25, with calloused hands and ambitious eyes. Despite sharing the family name, Edgar was Marcus's nephew from the poor side of the family. His father had been a failed farmer in eastern Washington who died owing more money than he'd ever owned. Marcus had offered Edgar a job out of obligation rather than affection, starting him as a general laborer before promoting him to shift supervisor when his organizational skills became apparent. The mill operated with the ruthless efficiency that Marcus demanded. 3 shifts ran around the clock, with workers manning the enormous circular saws, operating the steam-powered equipment, and managing the complex system of conveyors that moved lumber from the cutting floor to the finishing areas. The third floor housed the administrative offices, storage areas for valuable equipment, and the payroll office, where workers collected their wages every 2 weeks. Edgar quickly earned a reputation as a fair but demanding supervisor. He spoke enough Norwegian and Swedish to communicate with most workers, and his willingness to work alongside his men during the most dangerous operations earned their respect. Unlike other supervisors who watched from safe distances, Edgar would position himself near the massive saws when new workers were learning, ready to pull them back if they made a mistake. The autumn of 1893 brought changes that no one anticipated. A financial panic had gripped the nation, and lumber prices began falling faster than autumn leaves. Marcus Windmere, who had borrowed heavily to expand the mill's capacity, found himself caught between mounting debts and shrinking profits. The cheerful atmosphere around the mill began to darken as rumors spread about potential layoffs and wage cuts. October 15, 1893, dawned grey and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made every surface slippery and every task more dangerous. Edgar arrived for his afternoon shift to find Marcus pacing in his office, a telegram crumpled in his fist, and an expression of barely controlled panic on his face. "The banks are calling in the loans," Marcus announced without preamble when Edgar knocked on his door. "All of them. They want payment in full by December 1st, or they'll seize the mill." Edgar felt his stomach drop. "How much do we owe?" "More than we can pay, even if we sold every stick of lumber we have." Marcus walked to the window overlooking the mill floor, where dozens of workers operated the machinery with practiced precision. "But I have a plan. A way to reduce our immediate costs significantly." The plan Marcus outlined that afternoon would haunt Edgar for the rest of his life. With the mill owing substantial back wages to the immigrant workers, money that had been promised but deferred as the financial situation worsened, Marcus proposed a series of carefully orchestrated accidents that would eliminate the debts, along with the workers owed them. "These people have no family here to ask questions," Marcus reasoned, his voice cold with calculation. "Most of them don't even speak English well enough to understand their legal rights. A few unfortunate accidents, and we're suddenly solvent again." Edgar stared at his uncle in horror. "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about survival," Marcus snapped. "Do you think any of these immigrants would hesitate to destroy us if it meant saving their own families?" "This is business, Edgar. Our decisions have to be made." When Edgar protested, Marcus played his final card. "You're complicit already, nephew. You've been signing off on the safety reports that I've been falsifying for months. The state inspectors think this mill is operating perfectly within safety guidelines because your signature is on every report. If this mill fails and people start asking questions, whose signature will they find on documents claiming that broken equipment was functioning properly?" The trap was perfect. Edgar realized that months of routine paperwork had been carefully crafted to make him legally responsible for safety violations he'd never actually committed. His uncle had been planning this for far longer than the current financial crisis. That evening, the first accident occurred. Håkan Larsen, a Norwegian worker who was owed 6 weeks of back wages, was found crushed beneath a load of timber that had allegedly broken free from its chains. Edgar watched in sick fascination as Marcus and the mill's foreman, Jim Crawford, positioned the body and scattered evidence to support their story of mechanical failure. Over the following weeks, the accidents continued with horrifying regularity. Sven Eriksson was killed when a steam valve allegedly malfunctioned, scalding him to death. Gus Weber died in what appeared to be a fall from the log transport platform. Each incident was carefully staged to look like the kind of industrial accident that plagued mills throughout the region. Edgar found himself forced to participate in the cover-ups, moving bodies and adjusting evidence while his soul died a little more each time. Marcus had made it clear that refusal meant Edgar's own death, disguised as just another tragic accident. The other supervisors who might have objected had been quietly transferred to other positions or dismissed on fabricated charges. The immigrant community began to sense something was wrong, but language barriers and their precarious legal status made it difficult for them to organize or seek help. Families of the dead workers were told their loved ones had died in workplace accidents, and small compensation payments were made to ensure their silence and quick departure from the area. By November, 12 workers had died in accidents, and the mill's debt situation had improved dramatically. Marcus was no longer facing immediate bankruptcy, and the remaining workers, terrified by the string of deaths, worked with desperate efficiency and never complained about dangerous conditions. Edgar began experiencing nightmares that left him trembling and sleepless. During the day, he walked through the mill like a man in a trance, mechanically performing his duties while the faces of dead workers haunted his peripheral vision. He started drinking heavily, but alcohol only intensified the guilt that gnawed at him like a physical pain. The bodies of the murdered workers were stored temporarily in a storage room on the 3rd floor, while Marcus and Crawford arranged for their disposal. But as the number of corpses mounted, the logistics became more complex. The room, originally used for storing valuable equipment, became a makeshift morgue that Edgar was responsible for maintaining. Marcus had given Edgar the only key to that room, along with explicit instructions that it was never to be opened when other workers might be present. "That's your responsibility now," Marcus had said, pressing the heavy iron key into Edgar's palm. "You keep that door locked and you keep everyone away from it." As winter approached, the mill's operations began to stabilize, but Edgar's mental state continued to deteriorate. He started avoiding the third floor entirely, delegating any necessary tasks to other workers. The knowledge of what lay behind that locked door consumed his thoughts, making it impossible for him to function normally. The remaining workers, mostly recent arrivals who hadn't known the victims well, slowly resumed their routines. New immigrants were hired to replace the dead, and Marcus was careful to select men who had no connections to the previous workers. The mill's productivity actually increased as the new workers, warned about the recent accidents, followed safety protocols with religious devotion. Edgar began to notice changes in Marcus's behavior as well. His uncle, once gregarious and confident, became increasingly paranoid and suspicious. He installed new locks on his office door and began carrying a pistol, claiming it was protection against troublemakers who might blame the mill for the recent deaths. In December of 1893, Marcus announced that the mill's financial crisis had passed and that all remaining workers would receive bonuses for their dedication during the difficult period. But Edgar knew the truth. The bonuses were blood money, paid for with the lives of men whose families would never know how they really died. The storage room on the third floor remained locked through the winter months, and Edgar found excuses to avoid that section of the building entirely. Other workers began to comment on his strange behavior, noting how he would pale and stammer whenever someone mentioned needing supplies from the third-floor storage areas. Spring brought new challenges as the mill prepared for its busiest season, but Edgar found himself unable to concentrate on his work. He made increasingly frequent mistakes, forgot important instructions, and began drinking during working hours. Marcus, concerned about his nephew's deteriorating performance, confronted Edgar about his behavior. "You need to pull yourself together," Marcus warned during a private meeting in his office. "People are starting to notice that something's wrong with you. If you can't handle the responsibilities of your position, I'll find someone who can." But Edgar was beyond caring about his job or his future. The weight of his guilt had become unbearable, and he began to seriously consider confessing everything to the authorities. The only thing that stopped him was the knowledge that confession would mean his own death. Marcus had made it clear that Edgar's survival depended on his continued silence. In May of 1894, a state labor inspector arrived at the mill for a surprise inspection, triggered by rumors about the unusual number of workplace deaths in the previous year. Edgar watched in terror as the inspector reviewed safety records and interviewed workers, certain that the truth would be discovered. Marcus, however, had prepared for this possibility. The inspector was shown carefully selected areas of the mill, introduced to hand-picked workers who had been coached on what to say, and presented with falsified records that painted a picture of exemplary safety practices. Edgar's signature on the safety reports added credibility to Marcus's claims that all accidents had been thoroughly investigated and found to be unavoidable tragedies. The inspector left satisfied that the Windmere mill was operating within acceptable safety standards, but his visit had a devastating effect on Edgar's already fragile mental state. The realization that the authorities could be so easily deceived made him understand that justice for the murdered workers might never come through official channels. That night, Edgar climbed to the third floor for the first time in months, standing before the locked door with the heavy iron key trembling in his hand. Behind that door lay the evidence of 12 murders, bodies that Marcus had been unable to dispose of due to the early onset of winter and the increased attention from worried families. Edgar inserted the key into the lock but found himself unable to turn it. The thought of seeing the decomposing remains of men he had helped kill was more than he could bear. He withdrew the key and fled the building, not returning for 3 days. When he finally came back to work, Marcus was furious about his unexplained absence. "I don't care what personal problems you're having," his uncle snarled. "This mill is my life's work, and I won't let your weakness destroy everything I've built." But Edgar was no longer the ambitious young man who had arrived at the mill 3 years earlier. He had become a hollow shell, going through the motions of his job while his mind remained fixated on the locked door and its terrible contents. He began to develop elaborate rituals around checking the lock, testing the door handle multiple times each day to ensure it remained secure. Just when Edgar thought his situation couldn't become more unbearable, Marcus revealed his next plan. "We're going to expand operations," he announced in July of 1894. "I'm bringing in more workers, and we're going to build a new wing onto the mill. But first, we need to clear out some of the storage areas on the 3rd floor." The implication was clear. The bodies would finally have to be disposed of, and Edgar would be expected to help with their removal. The thought of handling the decomposed remains of men he had helped murder pushed Edgar to the edge of complete mental collapse. On the night of August 12, 1894, Marcus and Crawford came to the mill after hours to deal with the storage room's contents. Edgar had been ordered to assist, but when the time came to unlock the door, he found himself physically unable to comply. "I can't do it," Edgar whispered, the key slipping from his sweating hands. "I can't open that door." Marcus grabbed his nephew by the shoulders, shaking him violently. "You'll open that door, or I'll kill you and add your body to the pile. Do you understand me?" But Edgar had reached his breaking point. Years of guilt, fear, and self-loathing erupted in a moment of desperate courage. He grabbed the key from the floor and swallowed it, ensuring that the door could never be opened without destroying the evidence inside. The action caught Marcus completely off guard. Without the key, the heavy iron lock could not be opened without tools that would damage the door and potentially destroy the contents of the room. Marcus flew into a rage, beating Edgar severely before Crawford pulled him away. "We'll find another way," Crawford said. But they all knew the truth. The door had been specially reinforced to protect valuable equipment, and opening it by force would require significant noise and effort that might attract attention from the town. Marcus made a final threat before leaving Edgar bleeding on the mill floor. "You'll stay here and guard that door until you die. If anyone ever discovers what's in that room, I'll make sure your death is slower and more painful than anything those immigrants suffered." True to his word, Marcus arranged for Edgar to be permanently assigned to live at the mill as a night watchman, ensuring that he would never be far from the locked door. Edgar's family was told he had chosen to take a position that required him to live on site, and his isolation from the outside world became complete. Edgar Windmere became the mill's perpetual guardian, living in a small room on the 2nd floor and spending his days maintaining the machinery that gradually fell into disuse as Marcus redirected his business interests elsewhere. The other workers were slowly laid off or transferred, until Edgar was the only person left in the vast, echoing building. The years passed, like a slow torture for Edgar. He aged rapidly, his hair turning white and his hands developing a permanent tremor. He survived on deliveries of basic supplies that were left at the mill's entrance, and he rarely spoke to the few people who occasionally had reason to visit the property. Marcus died in 1903, taking his secrets to the grave, but Edgar remained at his post. He had become incapable of leaving the mill, compelled by a combination of guilt, fear, and the knowledge that he was the only thing standing between the world and the evidence of 12 murders. Visitors to the mill over the years reported Edgar's strange behavior, particularly his obsessive protection of the 3rd floor. He would become agitated and sometimes violent if anyone attempted to access that area, and he was known to spend hours standing guard outside the locked door, muttering to himself in languages he had learned from the dead workers. The mill's new owners, who purchased the property after Marcus's death, initially tried to remove Edgar, but he proved impossible to dislodge. He knew every inch of the building, could predict and counter any attempt to force him out, and seemed to require almost no resources to survive. Eventually, they decided it was easier to let him stay, treating him as an eccentric caretaker rather than an unwanted squatter. Edgar's vigil continued through the decades, even as the mill fell deeper into decay, and the outside world forgot about the thriving operation it had once housed. He became a local legend, the Mad Hermit of Windmere Mill, a curiosity that parents used to frighten their children into good behavior. But Edgar knew the truth, that he could never speak. Behind that locked door lay the proof of Marcus Windmere's crimes, not just the bodies of 12 murdered workers, but also the detailed records that Marcus had kept of the scheme, documents that would have exposed the full extent of the conspiracy if they had ever been discovered. Edgar had become the guardian of a secret that was too dangerous to reveal and too terrible to forget. He lived with the knowledge that justice for the murdered workers would never come, that their families would never know the truth about their loved ones' deaths, and that he was complicit in denying them even the comfort of proper burial. As the 1930s arrived and Edgar entered his 70s, his vigil showed no signs of ending. He had become as much a part of the mill as the rotting timbers and rusted machinery, a living monument to guilt and shame. The locked door remained as secure as ever, its contents preserved by Edgar's unwavering determination to ensure that some secrets remain buried forever. This story reminds us that sometimes the greatest horrors are not supernatural entities or ancient curses, but the very human capacity for evil and the terrible weight of complicity in unspeakable acts. Edgar Windmere's endless vigil serves as a testament to the power of guilt to imprison the soul more effectively than any physical barrier ever could. What do you think about Edgar's decades-long imprisonment by his own conscience? Do you believe he was a victim of his uncle's manipulation, or was he equally responsible for the deaths of those 12 workers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as haunting as we did, please subscribe to Dark Heritage Files for more tales from America's darkest history. And don't forget to share this video with others who appreciate stories that blur the line between history and horror. We'll see you in the shadows of our next investigation.